Brady with us to look at the latest language.
Good morning, this is Michael Gray with legislative council. You should have a draft number 3.5 with the date of today with an 8:07 a.m. timestamp. And if you go to page 6 of that, section 6, this is the language about reptiles and amphibians and takings and possession. Just step through, actually, could I just step through this entire section?
Please.
So the first subsection, person shall not intentionally take a reptile or amphibian in the state unless authorized by rules adopted under sub B. The commissioner will have discretionary rulemaking to allow taking under sub B. And you added the word intentionally on page 6, line 3. So the accidental taking, motor vehicle, otherwise is not going to be a violation. Then a person shall not possess, import, or sell a species of reptile or amphibian that, as determined by the commissioner by rule, poses a threat to species and ecosystems in Vermont, except that the rule shall allow for possession of prohibited species legally acquired as a pet prior to July 1, 2025. And then such a rule may include a list of prohibited or restricted species. So again, it's a shall, they shall adopt that rule for those that pose a threat to species and ecosystem, but the discretion is there for a list of prohibited or restricted species. And then the third category of mandatory rules, a person shall not collect or possess, or mandatory provisions, shall not collect or possess for commercial use, export, or sale reptiles and amphibians specified by the commissioner by rule. And then you have the commissioner's rulemaking. They may authorize the following by rule: the taking of reptiles or amphibians that have been classified as common, widespread, and abundant, known as S5 rank species, the stable or increasing populations indicated by data collected by the department. And then you added page 6, lines 18 to 20, the taking of a reptile or amphibian that, due to population risk to other native species or risk to ecosystems, has been identified as requiring reduction in population. That is not limited to invasive. That could be native or invasive. That authority is broad enough that the commissioner can make that determination that a species needs to be reduced in number, or maybe even extirpated.
Okay.
Page 7, under specified criteria, the taking, collection, or possession of a specified reptile or amphibian for scientific, educational, or non-commercial, cultural, or ceremonial purposes. So that is discretionary rulemaking as well. And then page 7, lines 4 through 6, the language that had been in previous versions that is usually accompanying rulemaking authority when the commissioner is allowed to, or the board or the commissioner is allowed to authorize taking. Rules adopted by the Commissioner of Fish and Wildlife under this section shall be designed to maintain the best health, population, and utilization levels of the regulated reptile or amphibian. So prohibited actions, prohibitions, 2 of which are dependent on commissioner rules, but then the commissioner has discretionary authority rulemaking to authorize certain takings if they fall within the authorized categories that you've set forth. Now, a lot of this depends on timing, and you'll see the timing on page 7, line 7, section 7. The prohibition on taking, possession, sale, or collection shall take effect on July 1, 2025. But that's really kind of a fiction for A, 2, and 3. Because look at A, 2, and 3. Because they're dependent on the rules adopted by the commissioner. So really, A1 goes into effect July 1, 2025, A2 and 3 go into effect. Well, A2 really, because A2 is dependent on as determined by the commissioner by rule, that really depends on what the commissioner adopts by rule, and A3 is as specified by the commissioner by rule. So you need rulemaking for those two subdivisions to actually work.
So that was confusing to me. You're referring back to section A in 4085 on page 6?
Yep.
Members have questions on that part?
I did just want to make sure I understand the timing that you just walked us through. So since section 6, 4085, A1, right off the bat says not allowed to intentionally take any.
Right.
That's followed up by number 2, which says that there's rulemaking
Yeah,
if you want to, and the rulemaking can take.
right. I think on page 7, line 9 and 10, it should say 4085 A1 is effective July 1, 2025. 40A2 and A3 are effective upon adoption of the rules required to
Yes.
implement those
That would
sections.
help us.
I think that makes more sense. But yesterday when we were talking about it, you wanted the rules, you wanted the prohibition July 2025, and then any rules 2027. But that doesn't really work for 4085 A2 and 3.
Representative Chapin.
My understanding of our conversation yesterday was that the prohibition would go into effect in 18 months to give room for the rulemaking.
That's the way I understood it.
And then if no rulemaking occurred, we would just be left with a total prohibition,
Yeah. that's
which
what I
certainly
thought too.
creates an incentive to the commissioner, because there are some legitimate reasons under that would be allowed. We want to be outlined under the rules, but it doesn't really require them. We could end up in 18 months with just a total prohibition against anything. So,
Yeah.
but that's where I thought we landed.
Okay,
That is where we landed.
all right. So that's not what I
Oh.
took away, and I'm sorry, I apologize. It's my miscommunication. So let's talk about that in the context of what this looks like. So let's redo 2. And a redo of 2 would be a person shall not possess, import, or sell a species of reptile or amphibian that poses a threat to species and ecosystems in Vermont unless hold on,
Rules are adopted.
right. Okay, I think I just need to redo the timing aspect of this. And move the prohibition on 4085 out to July of 2027. And okay,
Representative Chapin.
Just on that number 2, I mean, this is an exception for pets acquired before the timing of a prohibition. So does that really need to be related to rules, or can it just be an exception, except not related to rules?
you could allow, it doesn't need to be related to rules.
I think this only works if that
Yeah.
does not relate to rules.
Representative North.
You ready for the next question? Sure. Okay. So also on A2, so just help me understand the way the wording works here. Is the on line 7 after the comma poses a threat to species? What is it that's posing the threat? The the selling or importing, or the species itself?
Species.
The species itself,
Border cell a species of reptile or amphibian that poses a threat to. It's separated by the comma, so.
Yeah, that's what I forgot. What does it refer
I
to?
think it's clear, the species that poses a threat. Yeah,
So maybe the problem there is that we would expect the rules to list which species that is. And so we actually might need to,
could I pose a change to propose a change to this? So there's already a requirement that you can see in section 7, section 8 now, that a person shall not bring into the state any reptile or amphibian without authorization from the commissioner. So on page 6, you can say a person shall not possess, import, or sell a species of reptile or amphibian unless authorized under whatever that section is, 4709, provided that the commissioner by rule may prohibit importation, possession of a species that poses a threat to ecosystems or native species in Vermont. That, I think that works better.
Representative Sakowicz.
So so are you saying, to make sure I understand, that the commissioner would need to write rules that would list species that cannot be brought into Vermont?
That's correct.
But isn't that potentially a really big list and like from anywhere in the world?
So they're called red list or red light list or green light list, and states do it differently. Red light lists are usually much narrower than the green light list. I mean, think about it. Everything that you could bring in is going to be broader than what you can't. They're really not that long. Like 20 pages. It's not that long.
How big is your font? Do we have those now?
We used to have one, and I don't know what happened to it. But and other states have them. They're not unique.
It just seems like a lot to be asking the commissioner to be doing sort of a survey of all the species that could possibly be brought into Vermont and then deciding which ones we're not going to allow. Seems like it should be the other way around, that we basically don't allow it unless we know that bringing them in would be okay for some reason.
And that's the dynamic that states faced. And so that they can do a red light list or they can do a green light list. That this gives them that authority.
So I'm sorry, so you're saying that the commissioner could then
They could prohibit
they could make the
everything.
list
and then
either way, saying
yeah,
they could say
yeah,
nothing could come in except for these,
yeah.
or they could write, but we're giving them the choice of how to do that. Okay. Great.
And they used to be green. And then they went to red. And again, I don't know why they don't currently have those lists. But it all came up around the elephant, like because the elephant wasn't on prohibition, but everybody was freaked out that it had brucellosis because it was a Sanaland elephant. It was dying, and everybody knew it was dying, and they didn't want to bring it in, so they switched the list. I don't know what happened to the list. So I can track that down if you would like.
That's already in statute, though. Like this section 4709 is saying you can't bring an animal into the state.
You bring an
without
animal,
authorization. So
Right.
we're not changing.
not
We're
changing.
just adding reptiles and amphibians to that list.
You're adding in section 8 or whatever section that is.
Okay.
And then here you're saying the the commissioner can also by rule, develop a list or designate species that cannot be brought in.
Brought in, but it already says here, you can't bring them in without permission to bring.
Authorization.
Does that seem, that seems odd to me to have it.
Or you can get rid of two and move the prohibited list down to discretionary rulemaking.
Simplify it.
I think. I mean, the whole purpose that they came forward with and that Hannah testified is that they wanted to regulate the commercial import and sale and possession. Your committee has kind of evolved past that focus. But if you're going to again focus on commercial import, it makes sense to have a list to what cannot be brought in.
Or, I mean, keeping that underlying thing here, which they brought us, that's fine. And then we're talking about kind of how to manage the ones who are here.
Right.
And can we not conflate the two? Can't we just,
Yeah, I mean,
why bring it up? Section 8 met their need on that.
right, and so you could move the list to section 8 if you wanted to.
We need a list. Because this.
You don't
this-
need a list?
I don't want to tell them to do more right now.
Okay, all right.
We're hearing repeatedly from them that they are limited.
That's all of section 7 got added.
No,
Right.
not all of section 7, no, because they actually brought up managing the taking of certain species,
Where was that under the original language?
section 7. Yeah.
This was an added section.
Mm. Maybe.
But A3 in section 6 would still remain because that's a collection of native.
Right.
So. And so that would remain, and that's not related to section 8, the authorization. Cannabis, but.
Because we didn't qualify it, could go. That's fine.
All right,
Then if Tagliavia,
In section 6, lines 8 and 9 shall allow for possession of prohibited species legally acquired as a pet prior to July 2025. If the species, I believe we're talking about the pond slider, we're going to allow it because it's already possessed. Why are we not somehow saying that it's would be illegal to release it into the wild if it's a threat? Not that anybody is going to know who has it, but or if there's going to be regulation on stuff that is allowed to be imported and sold, that be applied to a notification. You're buying this, you can't just decide you don't like it, open the window and let it go.
it's a great point.
There's a lot of snakes in the Everglades that wouldn't have wound up there if they were told they weren't be able to do
Yeah, yep,
it. A lot fewer. and
right. Right. Some might have ended up there anyway, but yes, your point is well
Can't
taken.
catch them all.
I say my son has one of those turtles, spiders that we've had for like 5 years.
This is
And it
albatross.
came like this big and it's now like this.
Tell them not to
big.
release it.
I made it very clear.
so how would you want language changes to address that?
You know, we just want to keep your brain nimble, Michael. Yes, please.
All right, so,
I don't know what section. You might need to step back and say, where does that belong? It might not be. in this.
and say it again.
Somehow following legally acquired as a pet prior to July 2025, somewhere in there, make reference to it being illegal to release it into the wild.
Okay,
Or wherever that logically fits
Yep.
in the statute.
If I see a hole, so come.
There you go. Maybe we could just substitute the turtles.
All right.
Representative Bartholomew.
Guess it's still unclear to me how we're gonna reconcile section 8 where there's import without authorization, and then in section 6, import based on a rule.
So you are
How do we fix
striking
that?
in page 6, section 6, subdivision A2.
Sorry, can you give me a page and line? There's
Page
so many-
6, line 5.
Page 6, line 5. Okay, all right, thanks.
Yes, Representative Zakowicz.
Page 6, line 16, where it talks about data collected by the Department of Fish and Wildlife. They don't actually have to physically collect the data for that, do they? Or they can collect that data from other institutions or individuals.
Do you want it to say collected or acquired?
I just want to make sure that
Good idea.
if it's already clear, because when I think of collected, I was just thinking that they were actually doing the data collection physically. But if that's not the commonly interpreted way to understand that, then that's fine. I wasn't sure.
Data collected or compiled?
I mean, they're going to be using peer-reviewed studies. It's not that necessarily that they're actually going out and doing sampling and measurement.
I'm not sure they'll be using peer-reviewed studies here. I think they might just be using the atlas.
That's true too.
I mean, I think it's other people's data. It's just to be clear that we're not expecting them to go collect all new data.
Okay. Do you want to say data collected or compiled?
Yeah.
Okay.
Representative Morris.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So when I first read this, before we started making these changes, I want to relate this to my snapping turtle hunter. Up until July of 2025, we're going to, you can't intentionally take it. We're going to prohibit that action. But the agency could create rules where if there was an abundance of these species, that they could create a rule that could be hunted.
Go ahead.
So first you're moving the deadline to July of 2027. And then you're giving the department the ability to adopt rules up until
We
2027.
said January 27, but yeah.
Okay, January 27. In January of 27, the prohibition goes into place and hopefully they have the rules adopted at that time. If they determined that those species are abundant, common, widespread, and abundant, and with stable or increasing populations indicated by data collected or compiled, they may allow the taking of snapping turtles at that time.
That's the way I kind of was
Right.
interpreting,
Yeah.
other than the date change.
That work for everyone?
Yeah. All right.
All right. So let's just review.
Yeah, did we get through all of it, actually? I'm not sure we did.
Well, we didn't get to the pond slider
I can't wait. We could finish and get.
and that.
While he's looking, I would just like to add that I say I have a constituent that is hunting snapping turtles. It's for consumption, not for sport.
Yeah, okay, that's, you might want to warn them about the health risks associated with it, but otherwise, it's,
I think I'm going to warn them about it.
So page 7 in section 7. subsections A and B, they're just irrelevant now. They need to just be rewritten. Subsection C relates to a person should not import, possess, or sell in the state of pond slider unless the turtle was legally acquired as a pet prior to July 1, 2025. And then you want language prohibiting the release.
Yeah.
And then subdivision 1 shall be repealed on the effective date of a rule adopted by the commissioner regulating the import, possession, or sale of the pond slider. So if the commissioner adopts a rule saying that they might be imported or possessed or sold, then the prohibition is repealed. And then on page 8, this is related to the endorsement on a language. When the Commissioner of Fish and Wildlife authorizes taking of a reptile or an amphibian by hunting, a hunting license that authorizes the taking of reptiles and amphibians shall include an endorsement indicating the authorized taking. And those are the changes. Going back to the markup that you, today, page 6, line 3 and 4, nothing is changing in those, that language. Page 6, lines 5 through 10, you're striking that entire subdivision 2. Page 6, line 11 and 12, that is not changing either, except for the subdivision designation. Those prohibitions don't go into effect until January 1, 2027. Then the commissioner has the discretionary rulemaking authority. She may authorize under lines 14 through 17 the taking of reptiles or amphibians that have the S5 ranking with stable or increasing populations indicated by data collected or compiled, and or compiled is added. Subdivision 2, the taking of a reptile or amphibian that due to a population risk to other native species or risk to ecosystems has been identified as requiring reduction. And that's native or invasive, it doesn't matter. And then on page 7, under specified criteria, the taking, collection, or possession of a specified reptile or amphibian for scientific, educational, or non-commercial, cultural, or ceremony. And then sub C, page 7, line 4 through 6 would not change. I think that's really what you.
Yes, thank you.
If I don't do it right the next time, you can
We'll keep working.
bat me around a little bit because it's pretty clear.
Good, thank you. Representative Bartholomew.
The hypothetical situation, if suppose we had a commissioner in the future who absolutely hated X snakes, what authority would that commissioner have under these rules to go after those creatures? Just hypothetically.
They would have to either say that there was a stable or increasing population indicated by data collected by the department, or that the snakes were identified as requiring a reduction in population because they pose a risk to native species or the ecosystems, and then they would have to make those changes by rule.
So the commissioner can't do it without changing the rule.
Without, not under this language, they would have to change the
Okay.
rule.
Thank you.
The question, Representative Tagliavia.
Michael Isaac.
All right, great.
Yes.
Yeah,
Just
Representative.
Echo in Burlington, that would be considered educational, correct?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
Okay,
yeah. They don't have the aquarium anymore though, do they?
they have a lot of animals.
Last time I was in there, it was during New Year's, so maybe they had shut everything down, but
I thought there were permanent displays of the turtles and the fish and everything.
I'll just say the aquarium that my son fell into when he was 4 years old is no longer there.
There are smaller tanks. It's
So that's how I'm like, my context is like, where'd it go? It's not there anymore.
there's research and education that happens.
It's in a Shark Tank.
Yeah,
That was experiential education.
yeah.
Before you go, the risk of putting you on the spot. We just walked, we sort of took testimony on H113, which is a lake in crisis. And I was, if this doesn't work for you, please feel free to say no, thank you. But I was wondering if you could walk us through the lake in crisis section of statute. It's not very long, but it might help us in our thinking on this topic. Not the bill itself, because the bill itself is, it's just missing a lot of sections, so it makes it hard to understand the whole program.
Okay, I have 6 minutes.
Oh, right, you have to go somewhere else. I forgot that. So that's fine. We can read it ourselves. And thank you for working through H230 with us.
And we'll be able to take over this.
Yeah, so Wendell sent the language early this morning, so we're gonna wait and hear back from Fish and Wildlife.
And if I get a chance, I'll email her and say, look for a new draft. Council.
Great, thank you.
so much.
Thank you.
Thanks. All right.
Good work, Michael. Thank you.
Have a good day.
Thank you.
Okay, members, we did just take testimony on the lake in crisis. I myself was able during that time to look at the sections of the statute and understand it a little bit more, but I'm just curious if people have thoughts of what we heard this morning. Representative Tagliavia.
It brought to my attention, and I haven't looked at it, but the Lake in Crisis bill has some sort of wording regarding drop in property values. Is that correct?
That was taken out.
It was
Well,
taken out?
in H113, it's proposed to be removed
Oh, okay.
as a criteria for being eligible.
Right. That makes sense to me.
Well, yeah.
What I didn't understand from the bill is that specifically to.
That was one of the criteria.
No, it
Or
would
is that
be,
across the board?
it would change the criteria for lake and crisis designation.
Across the board.
I want to ask about their request to expand the moratorium to prevent the leachate from the landfill can't be discharged.
Yeah.
I didn't know who to ask or what your thoughts were.
Well, that's DEC, we did have them in early on, maybe it's hard to remember, we've taken a lot of testimony, but we can go back and look at the written record. Secretary Moore, I believe, and then probably Matt Chapman, who we've heard from a lot this session, gave us an update on the treatment of leachate and what's going on there. So it's worth going back and looking at that testimony before we invite them back again. I feel like I'm sure they'd be willing to come back, but it would be good for us to do a little bit of work on our side if we're taking this up. Just to reconsider that testimony on what's happening now.
If I remember, they were taking it, making cement blocks out of it.
Well, yes, I would say it slightly differently, but yes, once they get it down to a concentrated level, they're putting it in cement blocks that go into the landfill for long-term storage.
But it does beg the question, what happens to the remainder?
Yeah, I think that's what's called the leachate is what isn't being pulled out.
Well, it's an interesting question. They both maybe are, but this one's treated and one's not. So, yeah. Your thoughts, you're strongly interested in this bill.
I am, because I've been up pending complaints from some of my constituents. I've been up to the plant several times, along with 4 other representatives and 1 senator. And they do have a pilot equipment going under a limited permit for the extraction of PFAS. And actually, it comes out as a foam, actually. That's how it ends up in your cement blocks. But it's amazingly accurate, and it really drops concentration. I can get a hold of Chief Engineers Jeremy Larrabee at Casella, who runs that plant. And the main issue some constituents have that last winter, there was a break in a pipe. They have two catchment basins there, each which holds 3,000 gallons. Happened on a weekend. They didn't discover it until Monday morning. So both were full, but it was in the winter. It froze. It didn't go anywhere. The balance, thing where the other three go, into a storage tank. So it did not go to underground drain 3 as perpetrated by some people overexcited about the break. I've seen the equipment, I've heard it run. Seen the reports from A&R. I think the permit ought to be extended on it. Their biggest fear is that it's going to be so good, leachate from other plants are going to be coming to Newport, to Coventry, treated, and then fit. That's what I think the big problem is. It's not present, it's future. I don't know if Secretary Moore is aware of all of this information. I suspect she is. It's quite an operation there. When you see all of the, I call them gasifiers because they're collecting the methane from the cat. And that's driving 6 of the biggest Caterpillar generators. I mean, they're huge. And that takes care of 8,000 residences. And they still have to run a burn-off pipe, get rid of the excess. They could run another generator, but they said they couldn't apply for a permit because they didn't have the room in the building. These are all in one big building. And there are big exhaust pipes. But methane burns in the engine. So rather than the atmosphere.
Other thoughts?
I'd love to hear from Michael to walk through the statute at another time.
Yeah, that was
It's a pretty straightforward statute to read, to be honest with you. I mean, we could have them in, but it's pretty easy to read. It's very much in English and it's, yeah, we can have them in for sure, but it might be just as easy for all of us to read it.
It's referenced in
Right
the bill,
now.
so we can find it, so we know.
Oh,
where-
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
And there's no funding. I'm not seeing any funding attached.
Well, $50,000 and they're already getting lots, I mean, for other issues.
Okay.
I mean, you, on the one hand, you know, I feel like it's not, in some ways, it's up to you all to interpret the will of your folks. I imagine some people don't want to have it be called a lake in crisis for the reasons that one of the witnesses articulated, and some people do for education and drawing attention to it. And I am not
Right.
sure. I certainly care a lot about PFAS contamination, but I also, I'm not sure. What I heard really was a fear about the future
Mhm.
and a concern about better communication. Yeah.
Well, a picture of a fish with a cancer on it says 1,000 words. It's there. And it is killed,
Yep, it is.
which is also one of the reasons there's a whole group out there that are against wake boats,
Against,
wake sport
oh,
boats,
yeah.
because of the angle of the prop and the thrust stirs the silt up on the bottom. That's where all your phosphorus is stored. So then it becomes active again in the waterways.
Yeah.
So there's, but
Yeah, my
water
understanding
is
is,
complicated.
my understanding is that that the desire for lake in crisis is motivated by PFAS.
Yes.
Just
Right.
stay there for a minute.
I was surprised they did not about septic. It's been illegal to spread septic on farm fields for some time.
Well, they did say biosolids. I do think we took testimony. I just found that is under Matt Chapman. It was under 303 on April 9th. It's easy to find if you just look under Matt Chapman. I pulled up the slideshow about how we're managing biosolids now. There's been a request from Representative North and others that we continue to have conversations about the spreading of sludge on fields. What I took home from the testimony is that that's currently now happening in only 2 places. And it is being tested and monitored for. So curious what other members think about spending time on that topic.
Seen all of my time spent on it.
Once it's on a farmer's field, it's in the food chain.
But didn't Matt Chapman, I mean, he gave pretty compelling, I thought, testimony that it's not at risk, the spreading of septic and the level of PFAS.
So his testimony focuses on the big plan that he is managing, and it's called Managing Residuals in Vermont. And I think it's gives a timeline of what they've done, what they're doing, and how the progress we've made.
Thing that I was not hearing or seeing was there's a lot of different PFAS that they were testing for, but they weren't testing for any pharmaceuticals or stuff like that as well. And there's numerous articles out there. There's a lot of pharmaceuticals in the wastewater too. They could pose just.
I mean, they're showing up in Lake Champlain. They're everywhere. So that's another big problem. There's a group in Brattleboro that works hard on researching both the productive use of urine so that we create less waste, and also what is the effect of that? Are those, what's getting concentrated, and is food picking it up? We could have them in, they're amazing. The research that they're doing on what actually gets transferred to food from the soil. That is, I don't know if we haven't had them in for a couple of years, but they're an incredible group. Yeah.
So are they extracting nitrogen or urea so they can apply it to and
They're not extracting it, they're using urine directly,
directly?
and then they study it and how it works. Like, the history of it is quite fascinating. I used to have urine farms, they call that, but Michael will talk about it. It was usually cow urine, but then that was the source of NPK for farmers until we came up with petrochemicals, fertilizers to apply to our farm fields. And so they're kind of going retro and saying, like, could we use this again? And they're treating through mild pasteurization because health concerns are requirements, whether it's a concern or not. Urine collected in Brattleboro and then spreading it on farm fields and monitoring the growth and how effective it is. But last I knew, they were also studying at their campus lettuce and carrots, and it was very much focused on pharmaceuticals. Number one is like caffeine, which is unbelievably prevalent, as you can imagine, and but also ibuprofen and very common other medications. So that's what and it'd be interesting to see where their studies are now. It was early on, last I heard from them, and they were not finding a lot of like uptake in lettuce and carrots. Rich Earth Institute, that's their name. I knew it would come to me. Happy to have them in.
Oh, not any testimony on cougars?
They postponed until they wanted to collect more data, is what they said. They did submit the paper, which is also worth looking at right now. What is that man's name? Yeah. So the day they canceled, just the day that,
Thank
yeah, they are choosing not to come in. We have another. Anyway. Further thoughts on PFAS? All right, well, so I encourage members to reread the PFAS testimony we've taken so far, especially because we have time right now, as well as if you're interested in the Cougar research that's been done so far that I thought we were gonna have a presentation on today. That's probably what I'm gonna do with my time before lunch. Jeremy Bruscotter submitted it.
He from Pantera?
He's part of the Career Research Collaborative. He's a professor. Okay, so with that, we are